Scott, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
All good, thank you, Brooke.
I am so looking forward to this chat because I think and I always say this, I always learn so much from these conversations, and particularly around other people's views and their disability. So I think this is going to be a really fun and interesting conversation.
Excellent. Yeah, looking forward to it. Really looking forward to it.
Great. So the first question that I ask absolutely every single guest is, how do you refer to your disability?
So this is the question that I've been able to almost rehearse because I know knew this one was coming. But yeah, I normally just prefer just to be referred to as Scott, plain and simple. But when people if people need to give a description or want to put a reference point in there, it would be I'm a disabled person.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason for that is because a lot of people see disability and disabled as a dirty word, which it's not. It's not a negative word. So I think by putting it at the forefront, it's saying it's okay to say, don't be afraid of saying it. I'm going to use it as my main descriptive point. And I hope that will help people. So I always say I'm a disabled person.
And it's so interesting when we think about like using the word disability, because what's really interesting, I find, within the disabled community is that everybody uses it very, very free flowing. There's no real issue. But as soon as you step outside of the disabled community and you say to someone like, oh yeah, I'm disabled, suddenly it's like a wall comes up. And you're right, people seem to think that it's this really harmful, really dirty word that you should never be using, and heaven forbid that you use it about yourself. So I love it when the disabled people are like, yeah, that's me, I'm disabled. Like, we can have a conversation if you want, but I'm going to use this word. And if it makes you uncomfortable, that says a lot more about you than it does about me.
Yeah, definitely. And you say that, I try to avoid using them, but I have them on like Facebook, the groups, the disability groups and things like that. And I'll pop in and out of them every now and again. And I had someone in there who is disabled, although they would say that they have an impairment.
Oh, okay.
They don't like using the word disability. And, I was looking at that, and I would never tell anyone else how to refer to themselves.
Yeah.
You refer to yourselves, people say people with disability, wheelchair user. And when I speak to them, I will then use their terminology back to them. So I would use that terminology back to that person. And their reference point was obviously, and this comes up quite a lot, was society disables us as opposed to our condition. But it doesn't matter what society does, I still can't walk across a room. So society is the main kind of thing that makes things hard. It could make it. Society puts the obstacles in the way. Society doesn't change when it needs to. Society's still so historic in its way of thinking. But I'm still disabled.
Yeah. And I think that's again, a really, really interesting point, is that people will refer to themselves completely differently and completely individually, which is exactly why I asked that question first, because I would hate to have a conversation with someone and misrepresent what they wanted to say. And because disability is such an umbrella term, and when you think about disability, like literally everything falls under it, how people relate to that is completely different. So it is super important to listen to people and how they want to be referred to or spoken about. But it's always such an interesting one, because when you just said, you knew someone that referred to themselves as having an impairment, a part of me felt really uncomfortable, and I was like, oh, I don't love that. But then that's just me, and that's how I personally view disability. So it's always such an interesting conversation starter, how we view disability and how we refer to it ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. And I think people can learn so much because it's such an individual, like you said, so individual.
Yeah, for sure. So I always go on to talk about childhood. Now, if I'm right, and I'm pretty sure I am right, but correct me if I'm wrong, you acquired your disability. So your childhood was what I like to refer to as our average Joe blogs. So like you had 2 hands, 2 feet, you were walking, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I acquired mine in 2020. So
What a
my
great time
child,
for that to happen to you.
yeah, brilliant. When you're going into all the hospitals and trying to get appointments, and it
Yeah.
bounces back. But I mean, I look at my kind of childhood, and I kind of think I was very sheltered
Mhm.
from disability.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Cornwall. So I guess in Cornwall, the population's small, and
Yeah.
there was obviously disabled people in my school, but there was no one with an obvious disability
Yeah.
in my school, and that's primary school, secondary school. Um, in college, there would have been, but
Mhm.
it was very, very sheltered from disability.
Yeah. Which I always think it must, because I don't know what life is like without disability. So my reality has always been disability. But when I speak to people who have acquired their disability, I always like to think and talk about how they viewed and saw disability almost like pre and post, because quite often what I have found, and this is purely based on these conversations that I've had, I'm no great researcher, historical master, that's not my thing, but it's very interesting to me that quite a lot of people pre-becoming or acquiring their disability like was not a thing that they ever thought about in a million years. It didn't really feature in their lives. They didn't really know too much about it. And then obviously post disability, it's almost like you're having to relearn and re-navigate the world, because this whole part of the world that you didn't know existed beforehand is now your reality. And it's like you've got to relearn language and how to do things and how to navigate this space because something has changed in your life.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, kind of to then go back again to when I was young. I just thought of it then, and I can recall there was I met a wheelchair user through my mum.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he was an athlete of some description, discus, javelin, shot
Yeah.
put, something along those lines, and he was collecting empty kind of Coke cans and things like that
Mm-hmm.
to be able to recycle in bulk to help pay for him going to be able to compete. And I can remember going with my mum to drop them off. And I can just remember, this is probably my first interaction with someone in a wheelchair. And I could just remember it being a really, really nice kind of feeling and a nice kind of thought. But if you asked me that half an hour ago, I probably wouldn't have remembered that interaction. It's just because I'm thinking back about
Yeah.
um, childhood now. But you're right. I think, I always thought that I was very inclusive prior
Mm-hmm.
to my disability. And actually, on the large scale of it, I probably was.
Yeah.
But I didn't appreciate everything. Definitely didn't appreciate everything. And I see now when I go around, I try not to just see it from wheelchair users' perspective. I
Mm-hmm.
try to look and go, actually, this is a very bright area. This people with sensory impairments issues, they may struggle in here.
Yeah.
How would they cope? So I try now to have that 360 view, and to say I've got a 360 view would be very ignorant of me, because I definitely haven't.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't think anyone can.
And
But
that's such an important point, because I feel like inclusion is wonderful and it's amazing, but inclusion in and of itself, when you try and include absolutely everyone, regardless, you're still going to exclude someone. That there's no way and I'm talking with very, very, very big scale here. I'm not talking small scale, but if we're talking about inclusion and we're including absolutely everyone, the antithesis of that is exclusion. And at some point you are going to leave someone out regardless of how inclusive, that's the word, inclusive you're trying to be. You will leave someone out. And it's the whole idea of that, like, you could be the juiciest peach in the entire world, but there's still someone out there who fucking hates peaches. And that's almost the same with inclusion.
Yeah, exactly. You know, going when you kind of go really niche and kind of really drill down into something, you know, what's right for one person is wrong for the next person.
Yeah.
And that's when you actually start need to really focus on decision making and being, I guess, deliberately inclusive, exclusive, but actually, you know, the best companies would just be flexible and the best people would just be flexible. So they would say, right, today, because person A is coming, this is how we're going to operate. But we know that person B is coming tomorrow. So we're just going to turn it on its head.
Yeah. And I love that as well. Flexibility is so key because, you know, whilst I say that you can't always be 100% inclusive all of the time, you should always strive to be as inclusive as possible. And I love what you've just said about flexibility is that actually, you know, one day it might look like this, but the other day it might look like something completely different. But as long as like the work or whatever you're trying to do is getting done, then actually it's fine. It doesn't need to necessarily look a set way, which is really funny because it's kind of all about adaptation, which is exactly what the disabled life is about. Like, you're constantly adapting to new environments. You're constantly adapting to how you live and how you work and how you play. Like, adaptation is basically all of our middle names.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think, you know, I've always said to people, there's no business in the world or that's 100% inclusive. And if they pretend to be, you know, they're probably the ones you need to speak to the most to say,
yeah,
you need to learn, because they haven't, you know, got an understanding that it's an impossible dream, maybe, but it's not. It shouldn't be hard for your end users, your colleagues, or anything. That's the idea. Is you just want to be as inclusive as possible at any given moment in time.
well, this actually is such a seamless transition into career, because obviously career moves always change. We all do different things, but you and is it inclusion for all or all for inclusion?
Oh, it's all for inclusion.
That's
Yeah,
it. I would love to talk to you about how that started, what it does, and how you got there with it.
yeah. So it's not a full pivot yet because I'm still working in insurance whilst I transition over.
Yeah.
But I guess kind of I became unwell. I've got a few conditions now, but I've got a condition called functional neurological disorder,
Yeah.
which basically means my brain is healthy, my body is healthy, but all the signals just do what they want, really. So it means I can't weight bear on my left leg. My body can just move in directions I don't want it to, spasms, tremors, you know, lots of different things. I won't go into it all now, but so I had kind of 6 months of not being well, but still working at the same time.
Yeah.
And then I was put on furlough because we had what was described as healthy people on furlough. So the healthy people should be working.
Yeah.
Which then it was a real struggle mentally.
Yeah.
My mental health just really dipped because I can't walk. I've got no equipment. I've got a catheter feed, so I can't. So it's not even like I can get up every 5 minutes and go to the toilet or whatever, because you know I can't walk. And yeah, I was just within a room basically. So the first 3 months of that year, I read more than a book a day on average. I would just wake
Love
up
that.
and read a book, because watching TV and things, your mind still wanders. If you're reading
Yeah.
a book, you're absorbed. But I'd go into sleep and waking up crying and different things like that, because
Mm.
my doctors didn't know what was going on, so I wasn't on the right pain medication and different things like that. That took so long to come through. But then we got to the point when that was sort of balancing, and I thought, right, I want to do something.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't be able to do it now. Physically, I couldn't do it now. But what I did last January, I'm thinking, would it have been last January? Yeah, last January, I did the equivalent of 3 marathons in my wheelchair and 6 marathons using one of those arm exercise bikes. So, it wasn't like in one go or 3 goes, it was spread out throughout the month.
Yeah.
Um, but as I was doing it and as I was building up, I was speaking to someone who I know through networking. He does a lot with mental health first aid training and
Uh-huh.
suicide prevention. And he said to me, "Look, you know you're going to have a bit of a dip when you come out.
Yeah.
So all for inclusion was my dip. So it's kind of like a oh no not it was my prevention of the dip, sorry. So it was
Yeah.
almost like a relationship rebound type of thing. You kind of yeah, so it started, put loads of thought into it, and decided, right, well, we'll start off with podcasts and a couple of
Yeah.
support groups. We do some webinars, we do some work with some businesses, but that's where it all came from.
Yeah.
It was a way of keeping my mental health stable,
Mm.
while supporting and educating others, because I feel education's that key crux. Do I still feel education is that key need? Yeah, it is still
Yeah.
the key need, but actually, there's that real want to be educated, which is probably preventing people from being educated, which I didn't realize at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
Now, if you was to say to anyone not anyone in the street, but most people in the street, would you want to be educated in this? They would say, yeah, that's great. I'd love to be. But
Yeah.
actually, how much would they want to be?
How much they want to listen.
Mm. And that's, I think, really key, because, yeah, I really want to do it, but I'd rather watch, TV for an hour.
Yeah.
I would rather do this, and how many things that would go in front of that is too much, and that's why people, I think, aren't listening. They're not taking that step to get involved.
Hmm. And I think there's also a level of uncomfortability about it. It's uncomfortable when you are told that you are part of the problem, or it's uncomfortable when you're told you're ignoring a problem, or they can be very, very uncomfortable conversations. And I think, as human beings, we naturally avoid being uncomfortable and we naturally avoid being in pain. So that's like our hardwire. We're hardwired to avoid inflicting pain and being uncomfortable upon ourselves. So when you're right, when you're given the option, do you want to watch Netflix for an hour, or do you want to learn about disability and how you might be part of the problem? 9 times out of 10, people are always going to say Netflix because they don't have to think about it. Whereas learning about disability sometimes can be quite jarring, and you're realizing that maybe average Joe blogs might be a part of the problem, which could be you.
Yeah, and let's face it. I mean, if you stand by and see something that is wrong
Hmm.
and you ignore it, you are part of the problem.
Yeah.
Well, that's not talking about, not limiting it to disability inclusion. That can be absolutely anything.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I always try to have as many people with different lived experiences in the groups and things like that as well.
Yeah.
So people, it is such a good learning point for people to come in, be involved, listen to lots of different people's point of views. I'll change the word, but yeah.
That is again, like what an important piece of like valuable information is that, and that's exactly the same for me with this, is that I try and get a complete variety of disabilities, because there is no one size fits all for any of us. And I've repeatedly said this, is that you could have two people with the exact same diagnosis on a piece of paper. You know, you go to the doctor and they've got the exact same, you know, like word for word, it's identical. However they relate and however it affects them is going to be so completely different that actually they might as well be two completely separate conditions, because we are all so individual in how we navigate this world. And that's, again, that's not just disability, that is everybody as well. You know, that's for your average Joe Blogs to someone who's disabled. It doesn't, you know, everybody's very individual. But disability in and of itself, because for so long it was left as like one homogenized group, people seem to think that it's one lived experience. And the reality of it is that it's so different for everyone. You know, how I navigate the world as someone with a limb difference, or, you know, like my right arm doesn't exist, and how you navigate the world as someone who uses a wheelchair is going to be two very, very different experiences. However, we are both under this umbrella term of disability. And is that right? I don't know, but it is what it is at the minute. So we need to kind of roll with it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I like about having the umbrella term is potentially it brings people together as a community,
Yeah,
and
sure.
I think that's really good. That's really important.
Yeah, I would, 100% agree, because I don't actually know anybody in like the disabled community who isn't welcoming of anybody else with a disability. We don't seem to have gatekeepers, which I think there can be in other like groups of people. I think we're all very welcoming, because we all realize that it's a completely different lived experience for everyone. So if you use the word disabled, or you use the label disabled, like, come on in, like, we're all having a party, it's a good time. We will understand.
I think when it comes to it, the gatekeeper is only yourself.
Yeah.
Because you kind of, you know, there's people who have got, by definition, a disability, but don't consider themselves as disabled, and then 2 or 3 years later they then go, oh yeah, I'm disabled.
Yeah.
And so the gatekeeper's only ever in your own mind, really, isn't it? It's what you accept is that gatekeeper perspective.
Yeah, so true. And I think the journey to accepting disability is a really interesting one as well, because I think everybody goes on that journey, like regardless of who you are and what your disability is. There is some kind of journey between, okay, am I disabled? Am I disabled enough to say that I'm disabled? Okay, I am disabled. Is that okay? And then realizing like, oh yeah, like I am disabled and that's absolutely fine. But like, this is how we're going to navigate the world. And everybody seems to have some form of journey of acceptance, and then maybe not so accepting, and then, you know, coming back around and being like, oh, okay, like the disabled community is there for me and I can use it and like I can be a part of that, and then realizing that that's what they want to label themselves as. So it's always a really interesting idea that we all go through this journey of accepting disability.
Definitely. I mean, for me, I think I'd like to think it was quite a quick one, but in reality, it probably wasn't, because there was that period when I didn't know whether I would get better or I wouldn't, and
Yeah.
you know, so all of that time, it was very, you know, I stayed off social media completely. I didn't want my friends to know. I was quite,
Yeah.
I wasn't kind of embarrassed or ashamed of going through what I was going through. But what I didn't want was oh, have you seen this? Have you seen it? It might be this. It might be this.
Yeah.
The million and one questions, or so much kind of awkward sympathy. Is that a term? You know, whether they're saying it just because it feels awkward. You know, oh, I'm really sorry. Well, don't be sorry. I'm not. I'm not sorry because you know you've got brown hair. You know, it is what it is.
Yeah. And
But
it's almost that like secondhand pity, isn't it? Because it's you know, it's not, it's pity because you're like, oh, like what a shame, but at the same time you're like, well, actually, like there's no point in being pitying about it because this is the lived reality and this is what we're dealing with. So it's very, and I say, and I know I say this a lot, so I need to really like find a different phrase, but it is very much sink or swim. And so you either sink and you become sad about it, or you realize that, okay, this is life now. And it's okay. Like, it's okay that I don't feel great about it because it is a change. However, we've got to still push forward. Do you have a piece of advice for either a younger version of yourself and someone with the same disability as you?
Yeah, so like the younger version of myself would almost be like to just do whatever you want to do.
Oh, I love that.
Because you know, if you ask me pre disability, have I got any regrets in life? My regret, I would always say no, I wouldn't. But now I say yes, and I don't regret my condition or anything with that. But I just think maybe I should have done more before I became disabled. You know, there's things that I don't know. I think I would have liked to have been self-employed right from the get-go.
Yeah.
You know, I think that would have been something that would have just fitted with me. I would have probably wanted to have actually, you know, been more inclusive and looked at that side, but take that away because that probably would have only come as a result of my condition anyway. But things like traveling and moving to different places and things like that, I'd have probably wanted to have done a lot earlier. So yeah, my advice would just be just to get on with it and just do things. You know, if you want to do it, you know, you never know when something can change your life, and it can change it just like turning on a light switch. So yeah, just don't hold back. Just go for whatever you want to do. And then like if someone's just like being diagnosed with FND, it is scary. It's you was talking before about kind of sink or swim. And I had this thought about 3 weeks ago where I thought I'm gonna have a look at some of the reasons why people were described or told they were witches. And I probably would have been classed as a witch because of my health condition. So they would have maybe tied my hands to my feet to see if I could sink or swim. So yeah, so I think like, you know, with FND it's so different. It can be a scary place. But there's loads of people out there that it's probably one of the most common conditions that people haven't heard of, or many people haven't heard of. So actually, when you get told, when your GP's kind of looking at you blankly going, what's FND? And you get in, then the neurologist saying it's rare, go on social media and there is lots of people who experience it. And like you said earlier, they experience it in so many different ways. Just because one person experiences it like this, it doesn't mean the next person will. So, you know, but there will probably be someone who, if you're saying, oh, I'm suffering with a lot of pain, there will be someone who also is suffering with pain. If you're someone that has lots of seizures, there's probably someone who has lots of seizures, or there will be, definitely. Speech is another one which, you know, I get impacted by this quite a lot, but you know, speech can come and go. So yeah, so I would always just say if you've just been diagnosed with FND, you just need to go on Twitter, Facebook, probably the two main ones, and just find groups of people.
Yeah.
Because they will help you more than any doctor.
And it's very interesting because I was actually wondering if we could talk about how you got diagnosed with FND, because I know that it's something that's incredibly hard to diagnose because it is to do with your the brain. Obviously it's neurological. But I know how hard it is to get a diagnosis. And I was just wondering, for you, was getting a diagnosis, was that also equally as difficult or straightforward, or was it just generally like a slog?
Yeah, so it took 2 years. So that seems long to a lot of people, and it seems long to me. But there's some people that take 5 years, 10 years,
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so the first thing they thought it was Cauda equina. So that was the first kind of point that they looked at. Um, it wasn't that, so that was ruled out quite quickly through an MRI. So that was easy to rule out. Then I was in hospital with sepsis, so that kind of slowed things up. But then I had like some MRIs
Mm-hmm.
just to see for lesions in the brain, because the next port of call was MS,
Uh,
but that was ruled out. Then they was doing, I can't remember what it's called, but they were sticking needles in different parts of my body and firing shocks into them
uh,
to see how they'd react. And I guess the frustrating thing is you so-called pass every test that you do, so you're starting to then doubt yourself,
yeah.
to go, well, actually, and that's a terrible place to be, because mentally you're thinking, you're questioning yourself, you're questioning every move. And no doctor goes, well, by the way, if you pass this test, this test, your condition could be this. And then we spoke about, my neurologist was then just cancelling appointment after appointment after appointment. So yeah, so it was difficult. It took about 2 years, but when I went into my appointment with the neurologist, in my head, I thought I could have FND. I'd already heard of it. I'd already found it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I think my mum would always say to me, look, don't Google it, don't Google things. And then she would say, look, I found this, I found this. And she would just send all these scary, scary things to me. But yeah, it is what it is. It's a long process.
Yeah.
It's a tough process. I was lucky because no one said or thought that it was kind of put on or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Yeah.
But a lot of people with FND will get a doctor or a physio or someone say, why are you walking like that? You can walk properly. And
Yeah.
why are you doing this? And I was really lucky then.
I had someone on this podcast who also has FND, and they were told to just stop having seizures. They were just
Mm,
told point like, just stop having seizures. They're not real. Just stop having them. Which it was just, you can't fathom it, but you know that it happens, which is why I wanted to ask you how the journey was like for you, because as you said, a lot of people have had the experience where doctors and so-called healthcare professionals have turned around and been like, stop doing it, or like, why are you doing this, like, or you're faking it, or this isn't real, like it's all psychosomatic, when actually that's very much not the case. And it's just a very, very interesting place to look at FND from someone who hasn't got it or hasn't experienced anything like it. The idea that a healthcare professional wouldn't believe you, I think, is so gut-wrenching, because they're meant to be the
mm,
people who are meant to help you, and yet you're being told at different corners that right, it's not this, so it could be this, but by the way, you're faking it, and like, oh, you can just stop whenever you choose to. And that's not the reality of it. So thank you for sharing your journey, because I know it's not an easy one, particularly surrounding FND.
Yeah, I was really, really lucky, and it shouldn't be the case. But I was lucky. My GP was really good, but then I switched my GP. So my GP switched over because the practice kept cancelling the appointments. So then the kind of practice manager or the senior doctor at the GPs then took over. So he just puts appointments in his Outlook diary. So he's proactive
Yeah.
with it. You know, he openly admits that like he's learning about FND through me.
Yeah.
But I'd rather that than someone go, yeah, I'm an expert, but I'm really just pin the tail on the donkey.
Yeah. I like to think that through any form of hardship, that if you can notice something positive, or, or you notice a positive attribute within yourself, then you've learned something. And I was wondering, through any type of hardship in your life or any times of hardship, have you noticed a particular positive attribute about yourself that actually, upon reflection, you look back and you think, actually, I'm incredibly proud of that attribute within myself?
If you asked it to people who are close to me, they would probably come up with positive attributes. But I feel like the last kind of 6 months, well, longer than that, have been really tough mentally and fatigue and kind of mental health. I'm not in a great place, so I kind I kind of downplay a lot, and I see a lot of things that maybe are hard when they shouldn't be. No, that's a terrible turn of phrase, but I guess they're harder now than what they would have been kind of 6, 12 months ago is
Yeah.
where I'm coming from with it. So I guess kind of just keep the fact that I just try to keep showing up and
Yeah.
being honest would be an attribute if it's an
Yeah,
attribute.
I think so. I think, there is time and place for rest and pausing and stopping, but there is also time and place for actually just carrying on, because sometimes the worst thing in the world to do is stop. Like, I'm someone who believes that momentum creates momentum, because that's scientifically backed. That you can't argue with me, or that that's a fact. So sometimes it is just better to push forward and almost, like, accept that things aren't necessarily going to be incredible or amazing right now, but if you just keep plodding along, it will get better.
Yeah, and I say then, I have actually taken some rest periods at different times. What I've done is I've not gone, right, I'm stopping, but let's say I've got 6 plates to spin. I'm going to rest this plate and this plate and focus on these. So I've been able to identify that. So actually, that is probably the real answer. Now we get to it. That's probably the answer.
See, I think you're so right. There is a massive difference between resting and stopping, because resting is when you realize that actually, it's okay to slow down. I can have, like, however long I need, but as long as you kind of know that you're going to get back up, and you're almost putting like a time limit on your rest. So, like, I like to think that if I rest for an hour, but I really commit to that hour of rest, like, I don't do anything in that hour, I will sit like a vegetable, and it's incredible. And that is me committing to my rest. But I know that I'm going to get up after that hour. So it's that almost putting a time frame on having like downtime, and then knowing that you're slowly going to pick stuff back up. And I think that's probably like the best way to always move forward, is to know that at some point you will be picking stuff back up again.
Yeah, definitely. There's no kind of end to it. There's no, I think a lot of the time as well, when you're resting and you're thinking about other things, and you can then have some of the best ideas come out, because you're subconsciously still, this is still passionate for me. So I'm going to come back to an idea here at some point, and well, hang on, I'm having a wash now, and I've just thought of an awesome idea. So yeah, write that one down because, like I said earlier, my memory's not always great. So I think I've forgotten some of my best ideas. I'll remember them one day.
They'll come back to you the most inconvenient of time. You'll be like in the shower, or you'll be like putting forks and knives away in the cutlery drawer, and you'll be like, oh my God, here it is. Like pulled it out from the sky.
Yeah, yeah. I just hope like I'm not going to have an operation and just about to go in because I'll have no pen or you know, I'll have to get them to write on the body somewhere just to go right. Marker pen. Remember this.
Yeah. That's funny. I like to think and ask people about the weird questions that they receive being disabled, because I don't know a disabled person who hasn't had really bizarre questions like asked of them. And so I was wondering, do you have like a particular favorite funny question or weird question that you get asked like often, or does one particular one stick out in your mind?
Do you know what? I don't really get. I am that one person that doesn't really get asked those many weird questions.
Yeah.
What I find is I get where I live. There's a lot of schools near me, so I get a lot of young children stare at me.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like that because then I'll put my thumb up, wave to them or something, and their parents um might kind of be embarrassed to say, "Oh no, no, no," and then it's a case of, "No, it's fine." But
Yeah.
so we have a lot of kind of interactions there. So I guess that's kind of the one of the things. And what I love to do is pick up on something that people say, which I don't know, could be phrased better, let's say. So say if I know someone,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they say something to me like, I don't know, using the word run as an example.
Uh-huh.
So I just like to kind of turn that back with a sarcastic joke and comment.
Yeah.
But yeah, questions wise, no, I don't really get it. I don't go out a great deal at the moment. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard for me to get out of the house because we're still waiting for the council to put the ramp in and things like that.
Yeah.
So I interact with a lot of people regularly that I know,
Yeah.
and places I go are expecting me. So yeah, I think I'm quite lucky because I know there's so many people where they have ridiculous questions fired at them.
Yeah.
I've, there's a number of things that I've been really lucky in, and I haven't really had the same negativity cast at me that some people have had.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fortunate. I know I'm fortunate. It's a real kind of, I guess, privilege. I've not had it, whereas some people have, and it will come one day.
Yeah.
Um,
Your weird
but yeah,
questions are gonna come at some point. You'll get something that will bowl you over, and that's when I'll get a message being like, "Today was the day."
yeah, exactly. But I think I the weird question when someone throws it at me, I'm just looking forward to what my weird answer is going to be back to them. That's what you want to know is what the answer is, not what the question was.
Yeah. I only have one final question for you, Scott. And that is, can you say that you're disabled and proud?
Of course, yeah, yeah. There's no way that I couldn't say that at all. It's 100%.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being a guest today. I have found so many interesting points in this conversation, from talking about diagnosis to your life pre and post disability. I've really loved it, and thank you so much for spending your time having this conversation with me.
No worries. Thank you for having me on.
See you soon.